This video is predicting that the Toronto Blue Jays baseball team will win this year's World Series in Game 5 on October 29th, 2025, and or one or two of the Toronto Blue Jays players in Game 5 will collide with each other or the outfield wall and suffer a severe head injury. And this video is also documenting this prediction that famous singer-songwriter Paul Simon of Simon and Garfunkel will slip and fall and severely injure his head on October 30th, 2025. The first news of this will be reported on October 31st, 2025, and he is predicted to die as a result of his head injury on November 5th, 2025. The date that this video is posted on the social media platform you are watching it on proves that this prediction is being made ahead of time, as do these time-stamped emails and forensic notes PDF documents. If you are skeptical for some reason, please email me and I will forward these to you. All right, welcome. This video is predicting that the Toronto Blue Jays will beat the Los Angeles Dodgers in this year's World Series, and specifically in Game 5, or there will be a collision between one or two Blue Jays players that will injure the player's head. Okay, so either the Blue Jays will win the World Series in Game 5, or a Blue Jays player will injure his head during the game. And then they will win either that same game or in Game 6 or 7. But I believe it will be in Game 5, but if not, it will be because God is pointing to this Game 5 for a different reason, and it would be because there will be a collision involving a Blue Jay and an injury of the player's head. Now, there are two reasons for this. One is that it is predicted that exactly 144 weeks after Game 5, on August 2nd, 2028, there will be a politically consequential plane crash due to a bird strike, which is why the Toronto Blue Jays, which are a type of bird, and as I explained in the other Toronto Blue Jays World Series prediction video, it all goes back to 1983 when the New York Yankees' Dave Winfield in Toronto, while playing in Toronto, threw the baseball and struck a bird, a seagull, a protected species, and Dave Winfield was charged by local police for this. It was an international scandal. And so that's bird strike symbolism. So that's one reason. And by the way, the plane crash will be involving the Democrat nominee for the presidential race, Gavin Newsom, and that will clear the way for Michelle Obama to step in an emergency and become the president a couple months later with the election. And she will make Barack Obama her vice president. That's how he will overcome the 22nd Amendment. Okay, so that's one thing, but also the reason why the player will injure his head, or, like I'm saying, the Blue Jays will simply win the game. I'm not saying this is going to happen. I'm saying either or both. Okay, so either they're going to win or there will be this collision, which will be symbolic of a bird strike, and the collision will involve a head injury, or they will win the World Series simply in Game 5. Okay, and so the reason for the head injury aspect is because all of this is pointing to the other prediction, which is that famous singer-songwriter Paul Simon of Simon and Garfunkel will fall and injure his head, hit his head, either the next day or the day after, on October 30th or 31st. Game 5 is scheduled for October 29th. Okay, so either Paul Simon will fall and injure his head severely on the 30th, and the news will be first reported on the 31st, or he will fall and injure his head on the 31st. Either way, the first news of it will be on the 31st. That's the prediction anyway. But that's why, and Paul Simon is known to be an avid baseball fan, specifically a Yankees baseball fan, and he has a song, Mrs. Robinson, which has a lyric in it about Joe DiMaggio, and he sang this song in the outfield of Yankee Baseball Stadium after Joe DiMaggio died. And Joe DiMaggio is known for his 2 collisions during playing in games and injuring his head, and concussions, in fact. And Mrs. Robinson hints at Michelle Robinson Obama, who, as a result of the bird strike plane crash, will become the president. Exactly 144 weeks after this predicted win of the Blue Jays over Los Angeles. 144 because this is a number that's extremely relevant in the book of Revelation, the end times prophecy book. Los Angeles, because God is using Los Angeles to hint at fallen angels, and this plane will fall, it's predicted to fall and crash into the outfield of the baseball stadium in St. Louis as it is traveling from Washington to Los Angeles. So the plane will be destined for Los Angeles, and it will fall, which is why the defeat symbolically by the bird strike Blue Jays, because Los Angeles hints at fallen angels. And again, Michelle Obama will become the president as a result of this fall and make her husband, the Antichrist, the vice president, and then she will later step down and he will become the president. And so that's why fallen angels, because Barack Obama is Satan's representative on earth, the Antichrist. Okay, and so that's the predictions here. Okay, so I've listed all 3. The Blue Jays winning, Paul Simon's fall and injury of his head, and the upcoming plane crash in August of 2028, right before the election. All right, so let's get into what I wrote here. As you can see, though, this email confirms that this prediction is being made ahead of time. This stamp here, this October 22nd stamp. The date that this video is posted on the social media platform you are watching it on also proves that this prediction is being made ahead of time. And again, it's prediction for Game 5 scheduled for October 29th. So in other words, this is 7 days ahead of the prediction. But I also made another video weeks ago, back before the Blue Jays even beat the Yankees in the divisional series. I knew back then that the Blue Jays would win the World Series in Game 5. I, at that time, believed it would be the Milwaukee Brewers that they would be playing, because it would be 4 years after both of these teams were the prophetic teams God used to demonstrate prophetic signs on the 20th anniversary of 9/11, which I explained in the other video. And as I explained in the other video, it points back to the bird strike involving Dave Winfield in 1983. The 22nd, it was on the Antichrist's 22nd birthday, which is why the prophetic sign the bird strike 22 years later on a birthday, which is hinting at the coming bird strike that will make Barack Obama the president again. But the prophetic sign on the 20th anniversary of 9/11, when planes struck the towers, 2 planes, I should say, struck 2 towers, as in 22. The prophetic sign was the no-hitter involving the Milwaukee Brewers, 2 pitchers, a combined no-hitter, which was the second no-hitter in Brewers history. And on that day, the Blue Jays scored 22 runs. And then the following day, they scored another 22 runs. Okay, so it was all as 22 on the 20th anniversary, and on, as I explained in the other video. But it all points back to Barack Obama turning 22 years old on the day that Dave Winfield struck the bird, and he played for New York, which hints at the 2 planes that struck the towers in New York, and on and on. That's why the 20th anniversary of 9/11, the signs, okay? So I explained in the other video. But anyway, the Brewers didn't end up beating the Los Angeles Dodgers, but the Dodgers beat the Brewers 4-0. And that's because, like I was saying in the other video, it's because of the Brewers game 4 years earlier. And in that season, when they had this prophetic no-hitter on the anniversary of 9/11, the Brewers were wearing, the whole team was wearing number 44 on their sleeves. Because that year, Hank Aaron had just died, but the number 44 symbolizes or hints at the 44th president, Antichrist. And pitchers on the pitching mound in God's signs symbolize the Antichrist on the Temple Mount, which is why they no-hitter of these pitchers on the Temple Mount that were wearing number 44 on their sleeves, because Barack Obama is the Antichrist who will be on the Temple Mount in Bible prophecy. After the bird strike of the plane that will crash because of a bird strike, hence the Blue Jays, as I just explained. And now let's get into the amazing information that I have in addition to what was explained in the other video. Obviously, when the wise person will recognize when this prediction comes to pass, that they need to watch every minute of every video on this channel. And so watch the other Toronto Blue Jays World Series prediction video. Obviously, it's amazing and you need to watch it, even though it wasn't correct about the Brewers being in the World Series. But now you know I was correct because the Los Angeles Dodgers beat them 4-0, which confirmed the reason why I thought the Brewers, because it was 4 years after their no-hitter when they were wearing number 44 on their sleeves. On the same day as the prophetic Blue Jays game. Okay. And that's now bringing us back to what just happened a couple of days ago when the Toronto Blue Jays beat the Seattle Mariners in the American League Championship Series. This is an amazing thing. I have amazing, profound information to add to this. Stay tuned. In this video from the Major League Baseball channel, you can see or you can watch the, quote, 3 Canada-shaking home runs in Blue Jays history. Okay? It's amazing. Now, the thing is that I grew up in Toronto, in the suburbs of Toronto. I grew up as a kid, a big Blue Jays baseball fan. And this is for good reason. It's for this video. God designed my life for this video. Okay? He designed it that I would remember the bird strike of Dave Winfield because that was when I was a kid, when I was a Blue Jays fan. It's in my memory. And God accessed that memory through the Holy Spirit one night after it was learned that the bird strike would bring down the plane that would make Barack Obama the president again. And so it occurred to me, wait a second, one night in the middle of dreaming that there was a bird strike in my past when Dave Winfield struck the bird. And sure enough, I looked it up and it was on Barack Obama's birthday, his 22nd birthday. Well, now we know why it was his 22nd birthday, because as I just mentioned, it connects to the 22 runs the Jays scored on the anniversary when 2 planes struck 2 towers. And the 2 pitchers on the pitching mound for the Brewers pitched the second no-hitter in Brewers history, and which brings us to this year when Canada, or rather the Toronto Blue Jays, is predicted to win their 3rd World Series, which is why we have in history these 3 Canada-shaking, quote-unquote, home runs in Blue Jays history. And wait till you hear about this, because it's true. There are these 3 prophetic home runs in Blue Jays history. And these hint at the coming 3rd World Series win this year of the Toronto Blue Jays. It'll be also their 3rd World Series. They'll never have lost a World Series once they win this year. Okay, now, in each case of these instances of these 3 home runs, these Canada-shaking home runs, the home run, and by the way, I recommend watching the video, partly because I'm a Blue Jays fan and I want you to see it. Just kidding. But I mean, it's really, if you're a sports fan in general, you'll appreciate this. And by the way, on that note, some will ask, well, isn't it strange that God would use sports signs for prophetic signs? You have no idea. Sports signs are very, very important in God's signs, especially baseball, because baseball is symbolic of America's pastime. As James Earl Jones said in his soliloquy in the most famous, iconic baseball movie ever made, Field of Dreams, America's history is intertwined with baseball. Or something to that effect, he said. And the speech was about how America could be great again, which was a prophetic sign pointing to Trump, actually. James Earl Jones's speech in the movie. How about how America could be great again, and it was in context of baseball metaphors, which is why there are so many metaphors involving baseball and American culture and the English language, American English language. Because it's so intertwined with America, baseball. But anyway, sports signs are very proficient, efficient, I should say, vehicles for God to use for prophetic science. You have all kinds of different ways to communicate symbolism through the numbers and the scores and the records and record-breaking stats and symbolism for teams and cities that they play in and all kinds of things. Players, the history of the player, their birth dates. It just goes on and on. They're like so convenient for God to use for science. But another reason for using sports science is because God in general uses American pop culture to communicate to America through prophetic science so that everyone can see. And that's especially true when it comes to like championships, because that's when most people are watching sports. And there's the most drama associated with the game, etc. Hence, these 3 Canada-shaking home runs, because they all occurred in the playoffs, as I'll explain. So in each of the cases of these home runs, the home run won the playoff series for the team. Big dramatic moment. That's why they were Canada-shaking, quote unquote. Now, the 3 instances were when the World Series was won with a home run in 1993, one of only 2 World Series in history that was won with a home run, and the American League Divisional Series in 2015, when Jose Bautista, and this was Joe Carter, hit the home run, and this year in the American League Championship Series in Game 7 when the series was won with a home run. Okay? So in each instance, the home run won the series and propelled the team into the next round, or in this case, won the World Series. Okay? And incidentally, it's interesting that we have each round represented. All 3 of the rounds in playoffs is represented here. We have the Divisional Series represented, the World Series represented, and this year, the 3rd of the 3, the Championship Series represented. That's not a coincidence either. It's further confirmation for what I am saying, which is that all 3 of these were prophetic. And it's the number 3, because it's all 3 of the different series in playoffs. And by the way, this is how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works, which is only being explained on this channel. It works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming a matter, as the Bible says is required. And this is what makes what is being explained on this channel true and not a product of one's imagination and different and unique than everything else on the internet that claims to be an analysis of God's prophetic signs. Okay? And so, what's also more confirmation is that in each of the 3 Canada-shaking home runs that won each of these series, each of these home runs were a 3-run home run. Okay, so there's 3 of these World Series, series-winning home runs that ended the series and won the series, right? And again, there's only been 2 in World Series history that were won with a home run. I don't know how many divisional series or championship series were won with a home run. Probably not many either. Or maybe not even. Maybe these are the only examples. I don't know. But each of the home runs won the series. It finished the series. And it represented each of the 3 different types of series in baseball playoffs. And in each case, each of these 3 home runs were a 3-run home run. Do you see how there's a pattern here? This is what makes it a prophecy. This is how the ancient Jews understood prophecy, through pattern. This is how God communicates, through pattern. Now, it was after watching the highlights of Game 3 of this year's American League Divisional Series, when Aaron Judge won the game for the Yankees against the Blue Jays with a 3-run home run, that I first recognized that the Blue Jays would win their 3rd World Series this year. In other words, I recognized that the Blue Jays would win the World Series after they just lost and before they beat the Yankees in the divisional series. So I predicted, in other words, that the Blue Jays would beat the Yankees, first of all, and I also predicted that they would beat the whoever would play them in the American League Championship Series, and then go on to win their third World Series. And that was all revealed to me because of many things, because I have been studying his big picture of signs, patterns, and connections from morning until night for more than full-time hours for more than 7 years. So I have the background like you wouldn't, that you don't know, in order to immediately, quickly recognize these things because of the years of training, if you will, that God has provided for me to be able to recognize these things. And I immediately recognized with the 3-run home run in Game 3 that the Blue Jays would win their third World Series this year. And then that's when I produced the other video. The other video that's posted regarding the Blue Jays' prediction for winning the World Series was posted. You can see the post date of the video and the email date are before the divisional series was won against the Yankees. And back then, I also predicted that the Blue Jays would win in Game 5. Because no extreme skeptic, no irrational agnostic atheist, and they're all irrational, no irrational skeptic, agnostic atheist is going to believe that the God of the Bible is true with simply predicting that the Blue Jays would win the World Series in Game 5, given that they were in the playoffs, even though it would be before they beat the Yankees and the next team and then the World Series. That still wouldn't be enough for them. And that's because nothing is enough for them. Except hopefully this prediction here. Because hopefully they will recognize that they are extremely irrational in their logic and thinking and their worldview. It's absurd to think, for example, that all of this matter came from nothing. And it's all an accident. There's all kinds of scientific evidence and reasons for knowing this is absurd, right? And so I'm not even going to make this video about that. I'm just saying, I know how they think, and predicting the Blue Jays would win Game 5 of the World Series even before they beat the Yankees is still not enough for them. Well, actually, no, I hope that it is enough for them. What I'm saying is that predicting right now wouldn't be enough. Obviously, right? But predicting the precise Game 5, is more than just predicting that the Blue Jays would win the World Series. Because at the time that the prediction was made, there were, 8 teams in the playoffs. So you had, theoretically, a 1 in 8 chance. That's not enough. I appreciate that. But then I also predicted Game 5. And I also predicted the Brewers, hoping that would make it enough. But the Lord had other plans for the 4-year anniversary of the Brewers in the playoffs, which was them getting beaten by Los Angeles 4-0, which I explained, by the way, in another video, the details regarding that. Okay. But really I explained it enough. I mean, it was 4 years after they wore number 44 on their sleeves. So that's why they were beaten 4-0. Okay? Now, you know what? It just occurred to me. This may not be anything, but maybe it is. What are the brewers? They're brewers of beer, alcohol. What's Kamala Harris actually known for these days? For being a drunkard. I mean, seriously. I mean, it's not even like that controversial, right? Whether you're on the left or the right, it's commonly known that she's been making a fool of herself and slurring her words because she's a drinker. And so the Los Angeles team beat the Brewers because she will die in a plane crash with Gavin Newsom as they are flying back to Los Angeles together. Okay. Well, okay. That just occurred to me. All right. Now, I predicted before the Blue Jays beat the Yankees in the divisional series this year that the Blue Jays would win the World Series in Game 5. Okay? I know it's not enough to predict that they will simply win the World Series. I'm also predicting Game 5. Like I said, though, it might not be that they win in Game 5, and instead there will be a collision involving a Blue Jay, which will result in a head injury. Okay? Either or. To be able to predict way back before they even beat the Yankees that they would win in specifically Game 5, that is something. It's not just that they would win, which at that point theoretically was a 1 in 8 chance. Okay? but it's also specifically Game 5, or something else will happen in Game 5. And that's because, like I said, it's 144 weeks exactly before August 2nd, 2028, when Kamala Harris and Gavin Newsom are predicted to die in a plane crash into a baseball stadium while they are traveling back to Los Angeles. Which is why the Blue Jays will beat the Los Angeles Dodgers. It'll be the fallen Dodgers, as in symbolism for death, as in fallen to their death as they fly to Los Angeles. And the crash will be due to a bird strike. The birds, the Blue Jays, will kill the Dodgers this year. Okay, you get it? Now, either this or something will happen to a Blue Jays player in Game 5. Specifically, that will result in their a head injury. Okay, I didn't elaborate here, but I'm elaborating right now. It's not just that something will happen to a Blue Jays player in Game 5. Specifically, it will be a collision. Either one player will collide with the outfield wall or with another player, I assume, but one or two players will result in the collision will result in a head injury, which will point back to Joe DiMaggio's head injury when he collided, but also Paul Simon, who is predicted to die from a head injury after he's predicted to fall and hit his head on October 30th or 31st, right after the World Series win. Or potentially on the day of the World Series win. We don't know. Well, no, I'm not saying that. That's the prediction. I just don't know whether or not Paul Simon will die on the same day that he falls. Well, no, actually, we do know now. That was the thinking about a week ago. Now it is known, or it's predicted anyway, that he will die on November 5th. I apologize. And that could also be what's hinted at with Game 5, because 11 times 5 is 55, and there's good reason for 5 being associated and 55 being associated with Paul Simon, which is explained in other videos. Okay. Well, anyway, so Game 7 of this American League Championship Series between the Blue Jays and the Mariners was prophetic, extremely prophetic. These two teams were expansion teams in 77. They were the two expansion teams. There were only two, and they began their histories in 1977, okay, in the year 77. This is their 7 times 7th season, their 49th season. Now, the reason for that, if I don't mention it later, I do mention it later down here, okay? So we'll leave it at that for now, okay? Well, we'll just say it. Kamala Harris was the 49th vice president, and her death will lead the way for Michelle to become the 49th president. So it's their 49th season. But anyway, it's their 7 times 7th season, and they began in 77, and this series came down to Game 7. But more than that, we have more confirmation for this significance because the star player for the Blue Jays, arguably, arrived at the game, before the game, in a Toronto Maple Leafs hockey jersey. And the Maple Leafs are known for having lost a record 7 Game 7s in a row. They've lost 7 playoffs in a row in Game 7. That's a 77, or a 7 times 7, which is confirmation of this Game 7 that this player showed up for in a jersey for the Leafs and for the Blue Jays, who began their history in 77. But not only that, they were playing the other team who began their history in 77. And to make it even more dramatic, that other team has not yet been to the World Series. Yeah. Okay. So the star player showed up for Game 7 wearing a jersey for the Maple Leafs, who are known for losing 7 Game 7s in a row. The Maple Leafs jersey number he was wearing, which is what God is pointing to here through this, was number 34. The Blue Jays would win Game 7 in the 7th inning. That's another thing. The prophetic home run was in the 7th inning with a 3-run home run to make 4 runs. They won the game 3-4 and won the series 3-4. Okay, and the jersey that he showed up in was number 34 for this Game 7, which is hinted at with the 7 Game 7s lost in a row by this Toronto Maple Leafs team. But he wore number 34, and the game-winning home run was in the 7th inning of this Game 7. And it was a 3-run home run by player number 4 to give the Jays 4 runs, which gives us 3 and 4, as in 34. And they won the game. The final score was 3-4. And they won the series 3-4. Now, why is this? Well, I don't even write it in this paragraph here, so let me just tell you. Because the prophetic Blue Jays game 4 years ago, when the Brewers had their prophetic no-hitter, when they wore number 44 on their sleeves, was on the anniversary of 9/11, when they scored 22 runs in their games. Actually, it was 2 games they played on the same day, and they scored 11 runs in each game. That's because exactly 20 years earlier, I should say 20 years earlier, 2 planes struck 2 towers 17 minutes apart. 2 times 17 is 34. That's it. The 2 towers were 110 stories each, and the first plane was Flight 11 with a crew of 11 into the towers that looked like a giant 11 in New York State, the 11th state to join the Union, and New York City has 11 letters, and that's why the 2 games of 11 runs each 20 years later, because of the 2 towers that were 110 stories each. 110 obviously hints at 11. And it was Flight 11, etc., with a crew of 11 people. And so that's why, this game also pointed to it, with the 3-4. And the third 3-run home run by player number 4 to give the Jays 4 runs and the final score of 3-4. It hints at 34, and the player showed up in number 34. And I just explained that, and how it's relevant because of the second witnesses about it being Game 7, and they both teams started their histories in 77, and the Maple Leafs not winning 7 game 7s in a row, and on and on. So it's all about this 34, but why 34? Because it's 9/11 symbolism. Why is God pointing to 9/11? He continues to point to 9/11 through his signs, because it was the big warning of judgment to America to repent and turn back to God, or else judgment, destruction. Because it was Flight 11 with a crew of 11 that flew into the Twin Towers, looked like a giant 11 in New York State, the 11th state, because Jesus coined the phrase the 11th hour, which in ancient Israel referred to the last hour of daylight before darkness. And an idiom is in English, the 11th hour, that means last chance. Time is running out, as in last chance for America to repent and turn back to God, or else judgment, destruction. And there is a Hebrew idiom that's repeated in the Bible for 3 transgressions and for 4, which means in English, the tolerable limit of transgressions has been exceeded, and now judgment, destruction are unavoidable. Paul Simon is 9/11 symbolism because he opened the first broadcast after 9/11 in the Saturday Night Live broadcast in New York with the song The Boxer, and boxing is about knocking an opponent out and having them collapse to the ground, which is what the Towers did just before that, 4 days before that. And Paul Simon and Garfunkel in their 4th album have a song, America, and that album is called Bookends, and Paul Simon's death will be the bookend, symbolically, to the warning of judgment for America to repent and turn back to God, which will then mean that judgment, destruction is now unavoidable. With Paul Simon's death, it'll mean, from God, the communication will mean that the moment, the time or opportunity to repent, the window of opportunity is now closed. It's finished. America and Canada are now toast. They're done. Because the transgressions limit has been exceeded. That's why the Bookends album is their 4th album. Paul Simon performed The Boxer 4 days after 9/11. And his first album with Garfunkel was Wednesday morning, 3 a.m. Wednesday is the 4th day of the week. 3 a.m. is the 4th watch, the beginning of the 4th watch at night in ancient Israel. That gives us 3 and 4. For 3 transgressions and for 4, which appears in the first book of the book of Amos. And that was their first album after they were signed by the first agent to sign them, Wally Amos, who went on to, he lured them into his office with a gift of cookies, and then he went on to found the biggest cookie company in American history, Famous Amos Cookies, which hints at the famous prophet Amos, and this repeating idiom for 3 transgressions and for 4. And this first chapter of Amos has 15 verses in which this Hebrew idiom is repeated. And that's why Paul Simon's dream that he had, in which a voice instructed him to make his recent album 7 Psalms and name it 7 Psalms, was on the date 115, as in Amos chapter 1 with 15 verses. 7 Psalms refers to the 7 trumpets of judgment that follow the sound of silence in heaven at the beginning of Revelation chapter 8, which is why Wally Amos died at the age of 88, but also Revelation 8:1 begins with the sound of silence that's described in heaven, and Paul Simon's first big hit on the album Wednesday Morning 3 a.m. was Sound of Silence. And also Paul Simon's song Slip, Slidin' Away is from his 4th solo album, which was released in 77, which is the year that he sang American Tune at Carter's inauguration on the date 119, which ends at 9/11, and was the year that the Blue Jays and the Mariners began their histories, which brings us full circle here to our current moment when the Blue Jays just beat the Mariners just prior to Paul Simon's predicted fall and slipping and falling and hitting his head. And also the song American Tune, which Paul Simon sang in 77 on the date 119, which ends at 9/11, speaks of the ships of the Mayflower and Apollo 11. Apollo 11 is why it was Flight 11 with a crew of 11 that hit the Twin Towers that looked like a giant 11 in New York State, the 11th state. Apollo 11 is part of this. It's, the real root reason for Apollo 11 and Flight 11. So Flight 11 hit the Twin Towers 17 minutes before the next plane hit the other tower, the second plane. And that's because the 2 space shuttle disasters were almost exactly 17 years apart. They were commemorated every year on the same date. And the reason for that is because of NASA's Apollo 17 mission, which was the last time that an American was on the moon, which matches the first time in Apollo 11. 11 and 17 are also also hints at the Antichrist, whose name Bama is the 11/17th word in the Hebrew concordance, but that's another subject. So Apollo 17, though, was the last time that an American departed the moon, and the moon is symbolic of Christ, because it is a giant rock, and in the Bible, rock is symbolism for Jesus, and the sun symbolizes God the Father, and the sun's light is too bright for us to gaze at, but we can gaze at the sun's light reflected off of the moon. This is why watching for the timing of the moon in the Bible is symbolic of watching for the timing of the Lord's return, including through prophetic signs, including moon signs. But the last departure from the moon that symbolized America's departure from Christ was exactly 576 months before the first SHOT, the mark of the Antichrist, was taken outside of a trial on December 14th, 2020. The 576th word in the Greek concordance is the word to disembark, to step off, as in stepping off of the moon. They stepped off the moon for the last time exactly 144 weeks after Hawaii first legalized abortions. Ironically, Obama would have never been born had abortions been illegal at the time that he was born. Which isn't irony, it's designed by God. But it was 144 weeks exactly, and now we are talking about 144 weeks from this predicted Game 5 win to the predicted plane crash that will make Barack Obama, who would never have been alive had abortions been legal, the president and Antichrist. Of course, America's sin of abortions is the big symbolic sin for how America has departed from Christ. All this points back to the beginning of the nation, which was founded in Christ with the landing of Plymouth Rock, rock symbolizing Jesus, with the 101 passengers on the Mayflower, which hints at 11. And they landed on the date 11/11, or they came into Cape Cod and anchored on the date 11/11. And it was after the 11th triangular number of days at sea, which was an extraordinarily long period because God put a massive storm in their way that blew them way off course, causing them to be forced to come into Massachusetts instead of their destination, Virginia, because that was God's plan. And if you look at the geography of Cape Cod, it's a giant hook because it symbolizes the beginning of the age of fishing for men, which God used the American-speaking nations to spread the gospel around the world in the age of the fishing for men during the 19th and 20th centuries. But now these nations have turned from God and are about to be judged commensurately. A nation or an individual's judgment is commensurate with the amount of light and blessings these nations received, and so that's why God is primarily focused right now on the destruction of America, Canada, the UK, Australia, and New Zealand. Primarily, first and foremost. These were also, not coincidentally, in the case of America, the blue states, the worst restrictive places in the world during the CVD hysteria, which was judgment, except for maybe a couple places like Austria or something. But those nations are also being judged too, because they also received the blessings and light of the truth. So it was 101 passengers, but then 10 years later, it was the 11-ship flotilla led by Winthrop, the first governor of Massachusetts. And before he departed, and they departed, the pilgrims departed their ships, Winthrop delivered a speech derived from Deuteronomy chapter 28 regarding America, regarding the blessings and curses that the Israelites received, the promises of blessings and curses that the Israelites were given before they entered the promised land, before they crossed over the Jordan River, after they escaped the persecution from the king of Egypt. And the pilgrims saw their escape from the religious persecution from the king of England, in charge of the Church of England, which was really just Catholicism in another form, because Catholicism is designed to persecute true Christians and always has throughout all of history. And they saw their crossing of the Atlantic to the New World as their promised land, and analogous to the Israelites crossing of the Jordan River into their promised land. And they came to start a nation spiritually. There are only two nations in the history of the world that were founded on a relationship with God and the Bible, Israel and America. And they came to establish America, the nation of God's disciples, which, again, God used in the 20th and 19th centuries to spread the gospel around the world, because Jesus said that he would not come back until the gospel had been spread around the world, and now it has. Even the remote tribes in the Amazon have heard the gospel. And conveniently, these nations now have within them perhaps the same percentage of true Christians as does a country like China. I mean, literally. Because it's exploding in China, whereas now there's hardly any at all true Christians in the UK, for example, or Canada. Okay, so that's why the number 11, which is why we bring it all the way back to what we're talking about here with this number 34 here, which brings us to 9/11 with Flight 11. Because Flight 11 departed Governor's Island, Logan Airport, which is the island named after where John Winthrop lived. In other words, God, through Flight 11 on 9/11, pointed to John Winthrop and his speech regarding the promises of curses and blessings. And in that speech, incidentally, it speaks of 9/11. It talks, for example, about an eagle swooping down, and on the tail of the plane, Flight 11, was a giant eagle. It was an American Eagle flight, American Airlines flight with a giant eagle on its tail, and it was swooping down. Also in that prophecy, in Deuteronomy chapter 28, is a description of how those in Israel will be walking on iron under a bronze sky. And the sky on that day, on 9/11, was literally bronze color, and they were walking on iron. Okay, so I think I've gone off on enough here. That just happens because that's what my job is. It's not just to explain these things, but to explain the big picture. Okay, and so, let's move on here. So Paul Simon is symbolism for all this. That's why this prophetic baseball game is tied to Paul Simon, and why the Blue Jays are tied to Paul Simon, and why they beat the Yankees. And that's, part of how I recognized that the Jays would beat the Yankees, because Yankees equals Paul Simon, etc., and on and on. So next paragraph, I think. Let's see. No, I didn't finish this one because, so this game that pointed back to, 4 years earlier when the Jays scored 11 runs in each of their games, and the Brewers won the no-hitter with two pitchers in the second no-hitter in their history, while they were wearing number 44 on their sleeves on the pitching mound. And pitchers on the pitching mound symbolize the Antichrist on the Temple Mount, who is the 44th president. Well, this home run that was hit by player number 40, by Blue Jays number 4, to make the score 4 and to give them the 4th win of the series, is 4 times 4 days before Paul Simon is predicted to die on November 5th. But all this is also for 3 transgressions and for 4 symbolism. And again, Paul Simon is symbolism for this because, for example, Wednesday morning, 3 a.m., Wednesday, the 4th day of the week, 3 a.m., 3 and for 4. But also, as I explained, God used Paul Simon to point to Amos chapter 1 with his repeating Hebrew idiom through Wally Amos, and for 3 transgressions and for 4, which means the tolerable limit of the transgressions has been exceeded, and now judgment, destruction are unavoidable, which is why Paul Simon's death will be the prophetic symbolic bookend to this period of warning and window of opportunity to repent for America. It's now finished when Paul Simon dies. Okay, and so it's 4 times 4 days from this 3 games to 4, score 3 to 4, etc. And the first run of the game, by the way, was scored by player number 44. More confirmation of the 4 times 4 days from this game to Paul Simon's predicted death on November 5th. If that wasn't enough, the second score of the game was also by player number 44. Okay. Now, the Blue Jays are predicted to win the World Series in their 49th season, exactly 144 weeks before it is predicted that the 49th vice president will die in a plane crash in a Major League Baseball stadium in St. Louis due to a bird strike. This will allow Michelle Obama to become the 49th president. She will step in an emergency right before the election, and at the time, also, she will make Barack Obama her vice president, running mate. And all of that will, prior to this will all be sorted out in the courts, because Trump will be the first to run as the vice president for a 3rd term, which is also, by the way, why, and this is all just coming to be honest, is the reason why the 3-run home run in Game 3 with the Yankees, and this 3 Canada-shaking home runs, each of which were 3-run home runs. Okay, all of this is ultimately pointing to the 3rd term of Barack Obama. But, like I'm saying, the path will be paved when Trump does the same thing. And it'll be sorted out in the courts, and it'll be ruled that he is able to run as the vice president, because the 22nd Amendment simply restricts someone from being elected to the office of president more than twice, not vice president. And so Trump is being used as God's trumpet to lay the groundwork for the coming Antichrist, including, for example, the rounding up of illegals, which will then be converted by the Antichrist and his political cult of the left to round up true conservatives and true Christians in their coming genocide. And that's the truth of what is happening. We are in the middle stages of a genocide that has some temporary relief because of Trump's win in the election, but that's just temporary. It's going to get much worse than what we've seen, than what we saw during the CVD disease years with Biden. Now, Michelle Obama, which was a genocide in the making, Michelle Obama will have the 44th president as her vice president. The 44th president wore jersey number 23 in high school basketball. And speaking of baseball signs, I talk about this, the strikeout king on the pitching mound, which symbolizes the king Antichrist on the Temple Mount, Nolan Ryan, whose name in Irish means little king, was charged by player number 23 of Chicago on the mound on Barack Obama's birthday. And it resulted in the biggest bench clearing brawl in baseball history. And the Chicago player that charged Ryan, who wore number 34, which is 9/11 symbolism, as I've just explained, when on that day the fourth plane crashed into the 40-acre pit because it crashed at a 40-degree angle, 40 plus 40 miles outside of Pittsburgh, and killed 44 people. So that's more Obama symbolism, but also it's also symbolism for Revelation 9:11, when the demons rise from the bottomless pit. But also, the player that charged him on the mound for Chicago was player number 23. Of course, Michael Jordan, number 23, played for Chicago, and Barack Obama is the basketball president who wore jersey number 23 in high school. And of course, he's from Chicago. And on and on. And also, Jordan had a hiatus between his two sets of 3 championships, which since at the third term and second presidency. But he retired, just like it's symbolic of how Barack Obama has left office and will return. And when Jordan retired, what did he do? He played for the Chicago baseball team that charged Nolan Ryan on the pitching mound on Barack Obama's birthday. Now, the brawl was between Chicago, which symbolizes Obama, the leader of the left, and the team from Dallas. And God is using Dallas to symbolize the American Evangelical Church. It was symbolic of the coming genocide. I just thought I would get into that since we were on to baseball. But speaking of the Blue Jays, Nolan Ryan pitched his prophetic 7th no-hitter against the Toronto Blue Jays. And the final strike, which was a strikeout, had the batter for the Blue Jays swinging and kneeling on his knee, which is symbolic of kneeling to Satan, who was represented by the Antichrist, and in this case, the pitcher on the pitching mound symbolizes the Antichrist on the Temple Mount. But it was his prophetic 7th no-hitter, a record no-hitter, and it was exactly 30 years before the prophetic beginning of the 7 years, and that's another story, but May 2nd, 2021. But anyway, that's another subject, okay? But 30 years in the Bible is symbolic of a king, and Nolan Ryan is the strikeout king. And also, by the way, the player that got struck out there, Roberto Alomar of the Blue Jays, on that 30th anniversary, he was cancel cultured by the woke, feminized liberal left. And that's just the proof for you of the 30 years connection. And that date was known a couple of years in advance, it was 4 years in advance. I knew in 2017 that May 2nd, 2021 would be the big date. And there was the signs that happened confirmed all of the analysis, and that's just scratching the surface. But that's another subject for another video that I've talked about many other times in other videos. But the dragon was thrown down from heaven when the space dragon capsule splashed down and all that. Just like Revelation chapter 12 and the beginning of the final 1,000. Anyway, sorry. So anyway, that was enough. So that was good to mention that because it's Blue Jays history. When Roberto Alomar struck out swinging on his knee to the strikeout king in the prophetic 7th no-hitter. Let's see. Oh, yes, of course. He was 44 years old. That's the thing. That's the one thing that I knew I was forgetting something. I'm forgetting many things, but something important that can't be forgot. He was 44 years old. And so that's why he had his amazing 7th no-hitter at the age of 44 on the pitching mound, because the 44th president is the Antichrist on the Temple Mount in Bible prophecy. Okay, so Michelle Obama will have the 44th president as her vice president. The 44th president wore jersey number 23 in high school basketball. The symbolic first run of the game, this game we're talking about, as I already mentioned, was scored by player number 44, but it was off of number 68 on the pitching mound, which is at Barack Obama again, because the name Barack Obama is equal to 68 in simple English gematria. A equals 1, B equals 2, C equals 3. Okay, and the pictures on the pitching mound and God's signs hint or symbolize the Antichrist on the Temple Mount. Player number 44 scored the second run of the game with a home run, which just made more confirmation. As I said, the way in God's big picture of signs works is that it works on the principle of second and third witnesses confirming the matter, as the Bible says is required. The game-winning 3-home run in the 7th inning gave us a hint at 3 sets of 7, which God uses in the Bible to symbolize judgment. And it sent the Blue Jays to the World Series for the 3rd time, and the team began its history in 77, which is another 3 sets of 7. So the game-winning 3-run home run was in the 7th inning, in Game 7, no less, against the other team that was founded in 77. And it sent the Blue Jays to their 3rd World Series in history. And they began their history in 77. So we have these 3 sets of 7 here. It's a second witness, it's a second witness, right? And all this is to hint at judgment, because Joshua and the Israelites marched around the walls of security of Jericho and enacted a symbolic 3 sets of 7 before trumpets were blown. And then the walls of security collapsed in God's judgment. This is why Trump's presidency, first one, and his election campaign were synonymous with his border wall of security, which then collapsed after he was removed from office. 3 sets of 7. On his inauguration day, in the year ending in 7, he was 70 years, 7 months, and 7 days old. 73 days, which is 3 sets of 7, after he won the election by 77 electoral votes on the same day that Benjamin Netanyahu had been in office for 7 years, 7 months, and 7 days, as in the leader of Israel, as in the leader of the Israelites, Joshua, who led them in 3 sets of 7. And that day, the election of 77 electoral votes was exactly 73 weeks after Trump began his presidency campaign, when he famously descended the golden escalator in Trump Tower, which was exactly 188 months after the 7.0 earthquake in Joshua Tree, California. And 188 months exactly because the 188th word in Strong's Hebrew Concordance is the word woe, exclamation mark, used in the Bible in the context of extreme judgment from God. 9/11 was the first time in exactly 188 years that a foreign enemy attacked the nation's capital, when the British landed at Washington's Mount Vernon estate and then proceeded to burn down the Capitol building and the White House, not before Dolly Madison rescued George Washington's portrait. Okay, so now the home run, the prophetic 3-run home run, was hit off of pitcher number 83. And 83 is the 23rd prime number, which hints at Obama, whose number is 23. And again, pitchers on the pitching mound symbolize the Antichrist on the Temple Mount. The closing pitcher on the pitching mound for the Blue Jays was player number 23. Again, Obama on the Temple Mount. And he struck out all 3 batters. Strikeouts, all 3 of them, the final 3 outs. And God uses the final out for prophetic signs in series. And so the final out here was the prophetic out, but it was the 3rd of 3 batters that was struck out by player number 23. But get this, that final strikeout and the final out of the game, the prophetic final out that God uses as a pattern in history in these prophetic series, he was player number 44. And so it's a pairing of 23 and 44, the 44th president who wore jersey number 23. And not only that, he was also the same player, number 44, was the first to score in the game and also hit a home run. So they were expecting that when he was at bat, he might tie the game 4-4 with a home run. But player number 44 didn't tie the game 4-4. He was struck out, making him the 3rd batter to be struck out in the game in which the prophetic home run was a 3-run home run. The 44th president will serve a 3rd term and will be the Antichrist on the Temple Mount. The winning 3-run home run was a hit by player number 4, making another for 3 transgressions and for 4 sign, prophetic sign. It made the score 3-4, which was the final score. And the series was won 3-4. It was when Aaron Judge of the Yankees hit his game-winning 3-run home run in Game 3 against the Blue Jays that I recognized that the Blue Jays would win their 3rd World Series this year. It was believed that the Blue Jays would beat the Milwaukee Brewers because it is 4 years after their prophetic games, both of these teams' games, on the 20th anniversary of 9/11, as I explained earlier. Instead, the Los Angeles Dodgers beat the Brewers 4-0, 4 years after their prophetic game in which the two pitchers on the pitching mound that combined for a no-hitter wore number 44 on their sleeves. The Blue Jays will win their 3rd World Series against the Dodgers, who beat the Brewers 4-0, 4 years after the Blue Jays and Brewers prophetic games. This is another for 3 transgressions and for 4, right? Because it's the 3rd World Series, and they'll beat the Dodgers, who beat the Brewers 4-0. And that ties this year's Blue Jays and Brewers back to their prophetic games on 9/11, which I explained in this video to a degree, but as I said, this explained much more in the other video that also must be watched. Paul Simon is known to be an avid New York Yankees baseball fan. He sang Mrs. Robinson and About Joe DiMaggio, which is contained in the lyrics of the song, in the outfield of Yankee Stadium. By the way, the lyrics in the song are also judgment, because it's a sentiment about how things have changed, not for the good. Because the lyric is, here's to you, Joe DiMaggio. Oh, sorry. Where have you gone, Joe DiMaggio? Something like, the nation needs you more than ever before, or something like that, right? But it's all symbolism. And there's something missing. And it's Christ in America. So Gavin Newsom and the 49th vice president are predicted to fall and die in a plane crash in the outfield, which is where Paul Simon sang about Joe DiMaggio, which is also where Joe DiMaggio had his prophetic collisions. They are predicted to collide into the outfield of Busch Stadium, Gavin Newsom and the 49th vice president, on their way to Los Angeles, which is at Fallen Angels, due to a bird strike, as in Blue Jays, which will clear the way for Michelle Robinson Obama to become the 49th president. Paul Simon is predicted to fall and hit his head and then die, as in like a collision, like Joe DiMaggio and the Blue Jays, because they're a bird, beating the Dodgers from Los Angeles, being a hint at 144 weeks later, exactly after Game 5 as predicted, when their flight to Los Angeles falls, as in Fallen Angels. You get the idea, as I explained earlier. Simon sang about Joe DiMaggio in the outfield of Yankee Stadium. Joe DiMaggio infamously collided with players in the outfield and injured his head. Pitchers on the pitching mound symbolize the Antichrist on the Temple Mount. The Antichrist's number is 666. The news of Simon's fall and head injury is predicted to come on October 31st, 2025, 11 days after the prophetic home run that was hit off of Seattle pitcher number 83, which is the 9th super prime number. That's a pairing of 9 and 11. 11 days and 9th super prime number hints at 9/11 and Revelation 9/11. Simon is predicted to fall on October 30th, 23.29% of a year after his last concert in his tour for his Seven Psalms album that was played in Seattle. 2329 is the 666th semi-prime number. Okay, let me elaborate here a little bit, because what we have here is Simon's predicted to fall, or the news of it, I should say, on the 31st. Will be 11 days after Seattle lost, and the prophetic home run that was hit off of the pitcher on the pitching mound, Antichrist on the Temple Mount, 666, number 83, which is the 9th super prime number. Okay, 83 is the 29th prime number, and 83 is the 23rd prime number, and 23 is the 9th prime number. So that gives us a 9 and 11. But that hints at Revelation 9:11, which is the verse that symbolizes the fifth of the seven trumpets that follow the sound of silence in heaven, which is why Paul Simon's Seven Psalms album and his big hit that launched his career, in other words, Seven Psalms, his final album, his first album, is all about sound of silence. Okay, so we have the beginning and ending of Paul Simon's career. Again, Paul Simon is symbolism for 9/11 in general, though, because he performed the opening of the broadcast after 9/11 4 days later on Saturday Night Live and sang The Boxer. And then he has the fourth album, Bookends, which has America, and then America's opportunity to repent will be symbolically closed at the bookend when Paul Simon is predicted to die. Right? Okay, so Paul Simon symbolized, and also Paul Simon sang at the memorial on the 10th anniversary of 9/11. But 9/11 is also about Revelation 9/11, when the demons rise from the bottomless pit, which is why the fourth plane crashed at a 40-degree angle into the 40-acre pit, 40 plus 40 miles outside of Pittsburgh, and killed 44 people. Because the demons will cross through a door into the earthly realm after it's unlocked with a key, and music composition involves keys. Paul Simon is known as the GOAT, greatest of all time of music competition, pop music composition, and God uses goats for signs. And Paul Simon was born in 41, the year, and the word key is equal to 41 in simple English gematria. And the fourth Hebrew letter of the alphabet is the symbol for a door. And so they will cross through the door that's opened with the key. That's why the fourth plane that crashed at a 40-degree angle in a 40-acre pit, 44 miles outside of Pittsburgh, killing 44 people, is also Revelation 9/11 symbolism. But it's also because of this, which is that it's symbolic of the prince of the power of the air. It's an airplane falling from the air, and music is frequencies in the air, which is why Paul Simon. And Paul Simon is also, his famous song Graceland begins with the lyric, "The Mississippi Delta was shining like a national guitar." Well, what's described in Revelation 9:11, which the verse symbolizes this, is this demonic possession of people who have taken the mark of the Antichrist for 5 months. And it'll be through 5G frequencies in the air, which is why Paul Simon, a musician in music frequencies in the air. Paul, the apostle, wrote about how Satan the devil is the prince of the power of the air. And so the 5G frequencies will trigger the transistors inside people's brains that have been put in there through the mark, the thing that was put inside people. And that will facilitate delta brainwaves that will engender delta brainwaves, which will facilitate demonic possession. Which is why the first lyric of the most famous song, if you will, Graceland, from the 7th solo album, as in 7 Psalms, 7 trumpets of judgment, including this particular trumpet in which the demons possess people who have taken the mark, begin through delta brainwaves. That's why it begins with the Mississippi Delta was shining like a national guitar. Paul Simon famously dated Shelley Duvall, who starred in the movie The Shining, which is about the demonic possession of a hotel, a giant hotel, which is symbolic of a mansion, as in Graceland Mansion, and also symbolic of demonic possession in general, this movie, or it's about demonic possession. And so that's the connection to Paul Simon through Shelley Duvall, who he famously broke up with at the airport, as in portal, as in door, through the demons, that the demons will pass through, prince of the power of the air, before she got a plane to the UK to film the movie The Shining. And he met her on the set of Annie Duvall, which is why Diane Keaton recently died, and I made a video about how that's also pointing to the day Paul Simon is predicted to fall and die. But Annie Hall, the name Hall is symbolism for a hotel or a mansion, a large room. Well, in fact, in the movie The Shining, there's the classic iconic scenes in the ballroom hall. Oh, whoa, wait a second. Now, I've been talking about the prophetic significance of the ballroom of Trump's, but I did not realize, oh my, oh wow. This always happens when I'm going through the information in the video. I'm always coming upon new things, but wait a second. This points to the ballroom in the movie The Shining. The destruction of the East Wing, for example, no kidding. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, the ballroom in the hotel in the movie The Shining is in the eastern part of the hotel. It's like to the right of the entrance to the hotel. Oh my. Yeah. And like I explained in the other videos, it all ties to when Paul Simon recently sang in the White House the song Graceland at the state dinner for the Japanese Prime Minister. And God is using Japan in his signs to symbolize demonic possession because Japanese animation is obsessed with spiritual possession of people. And the day Paul Simon sang there in the White House was exactly 9 months and 11 days before Trump returned to the White House on his inauguration day. And his inauguration is known for the sound of silence during the power outage, during the performance of Carrie Underwood, who is known for having fallen and injuring her head on the steps of her home in the 4x4th state, where Graceland is located because the 44th president is the Antichrist. And the king's mansion, the King of Rock's mansion in Memphis, Tennessee, hints at Memphis, Egypt, and the king's palace in Egypt. And in the Bible, the king of Egypt is symbolic of the king or the king Antichrist, the 44th president, who will return to the White House that has 44 plus 44 plus 44 rooms, but with the addition of Trump's ballroom, which points to the Shining ballroom, and the Jack Nicholson scenes in the ballroom. With the addition of that room, the White House will have the 44th semi-prime number of rooms. And it's located at 4x400 Pennsylvania Avenue. Because since the beginning, the 44th president was to be the Antichrist. I'm floored here. I'm just amazed that that ballroom is hinting at the movie The Shining's ballroom in the mansion, because it's all mansion symbolism. And okay, where was I? Now I was explaining the relevance of this 9/11 thing here. With this 11 days from the day it's predicted that Paul Simon will, the news of his fall will happen, the 9th, which is 11 days after the prophetic home run off the pitcher on the pitching mound, whose number was the 9th super prime number. All right, now again though, the Antichrist's number is 666, and Simon is predicted to fall on October 30th, 23.29% of a calendar year after his last concert in his tour for the Seven Psalms album, which the fifth trumpet is one of the seven trumpets, that was played in Seattle. But why was his last concert played in Seattle? And why was this home run hit off the pitcher from Seattle? Because of the Space Needle in Seattle, right near the stadium. Because the Space Needle in God's signs is symbolic of the mark of the Antichrist. Transhumanism technology and a needle. Space also because aliens, or rather demons pretending to be aliens that will emerge from the bottomless pit, instead will pretend to have been emerged from space. And they will promote the mark of the Antichrist, which will lead to demonic possession of those who have taken it. And the thing was the mark of the Antichrist. And make no mistake, I know far better than anyone the reason and purpose for this prediction that is from God. And it is to prove the controversial things that I am saying in this video. Make no mistake. I'll say that again. I know far better than anyone the reason and purpose for this prediction that is from God, or these predictions plural. And it is to prove every single controversial thing that I have said in this video. There is no debate at all. It is to end the controversy. These things are fact. And I have the authority to tell you this Because when the prediction comes to pass, it'll prove that this is God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections that is only being explained on this channel. And his true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections overwhelmingly proves these things. For example, what the mark of the Antichrist is, who is the Antichrist, that it is a genocide that's unfolding, etc., etc. Now, having said that, there is nowhere in the Bible that says that one cannot repent after having taken the mark of the Antichrist. But it is the mark of the Antichrist. It was the mark of the Antichrist. In its current form, it did not need an additional something to go with it, such as an additional technology or a false form of religious worship. For those who are wise, it did come with a false form of religious worship, leftist politics, and also it does not need a new age of dispensation after supposedly all quote-unquote Christians will be raptured. In fact, one of the main reasons why the vast majority of quote-unquote Christians have already taken the mark of the Antichrist is, in fact, it is judgment for this particular doctrine, this Nicolaitan doctrine of our day that Jesus said he hates and is coming to make war with the sword of his mouth of those that teach and have the works that are a product of this doctrine. And for the commonly held objections that people have based on their understanding of Bible prophecy, they will be proven to be incorrect when the prediction comes to pass. And so I don't need to elaborate anymore, but I do answer these objections that are commonly held in the must-watch snakebite video. Now, let's try to finish this video here. Yeah. Now, what was I saying? I think I elaborated enough there. Okay, so yeah, Space Needle. That's why the last concert was in Seattle and why the Blue Jays beat Seattle here. 11 days before his predicted fall from the Seattle pitcher, a ninth super prime number. And it began because of Revelation 9:11, which is about the Space Needle. And Elvis, by the way, connects to the Space Needle, because he went there to film the movie It Happened at the World's Fair, and the Space Needle was opened for the World's Fair. Yeah. And okay, that's enough, because I've elaborated elsewhere also in the other videos, so that's enough, I think. So the seventh solo album, Graceland, was released in 86. The Blue Jays and Mariners began their histories in 77, the same year that Simon sang American Tune on the date 119, which is at 9/11 and Revelation 9/11, at President Carter's inaugural ball, and the release of Slip Slidin' Away from his fourth album. It was player number 4 who hit the game-winning 3-run home run against the Mariners. In American Tune, Simon sang about the Mayflower ship and Apollo 11 spaceship. Revelation chapter 8 speaks of the destruction of ships. And these ships symbolize America because of Isaiah chapter 23. It's amazing. So many, well, I don't need to put it that way because, I understand where they're coming from. It's just not, it's not amazing. But it's interesting. And it's not their fault. I'm just saying it's a recent thing that came to me even. And so there's, I'm not expecting anyone to know this. That's not what I mean. But what's interesting is that there's so many people that believe that America isn't in Bible prophecy. But America is in Bible prophecy. And ancient Tyre, for example, is symbolic of America. Ancient Tyre in the Bible, which God speaks of frequently regarding judgment. But Tyre is a parallel with America because Tyre's success and prosperity were a result of its natural border, as in Trump, border wall of security, protection of from its enemies by the seas, by the ocean, which is the case with America. God designed North America and America to be protected by these vast oceans for a good reason. It's God's country. And so anyway, also, Isaiah chapter 23 talks about the ships of Tarshish and the daughter of Tarshish. And there's all kinds of evidence to show that ancient Tarshish referred to Great Britain. And Great Britain in history is known for its ships. And that's why it was a great naval power and the world dominant empire for a long time. And its daughter is America, the daughter of Tarshish and the ships of Tarshish. And America's power is also dependent on its ships and its navy. Okay. And so the ships, the destruction of ships in Revelation chapter 8, and by the way, this parallel with 8 and 23 is the reason, for example, why the prophetic Washington, D.C. earthquake occurred on the date 8/23. Just for example, okay? So anyway, the destruction of ships in the 8th chapter of Revelation is symbolic of the destruction of America. That's why the destruction of ships is talked about. You have to appreciate that much of the prophecy in the book of Revelation is a parallel with Old Testament prophecy. And when we understand the parallel, we can understand the book of Revelation better. It's not just simply arbitrarily talking about ships. There's all kinds of profound meaning within all of these things. It's not just ships for the sake of having some ships there in the passage. It's symbolism for America. Okay, so the destruction of ships is in Revelation 8:8. And this 8th chapter is pointed to with the death of Paul Simon, the sound of silence, because his beginning of his career was the sound of silence. Now, and Paul Simon, of course, is the big, famous American singer. Arguably, Sound of Silence is perhaps could be the biggest, or it's definitely one of the most famous American songs in the world. One of the most recognized American songs in the world, outside of America. So anyway, Revelation chapter 8 speaks of the destruction of ships. And these ships symbolize America because of Isaiah chapter 23. The prophetic 3-run home run was hit off of pitcher number 23rd prime number. The closing pitcher, and by the way, the Antichrist number is 23 too, and he was the pitcher on the pitching mound. The closing pitcher on the pitching mound for the Blue Jays struck out all 3 batters, including the final batter, number 44, which is the 44th president on the Temple Mount, who played for the Mariners. The name Mariners refers to sea navigation and ships, making this more Paul Simon symbolism. Paul Simon's death will point to the sound of silence in heaven that is described in the 8th chapter of Revelation, which is then followed by the 7 trumpets of God's judgment, hence the 7 Psalms album, which was finalized, the final tour date for which was in Seattle, where the Mariners play. So the Revelation 8:1 is with the sound of silence is followed by the 7 trumpets of God's judgment, and 7th album, Graceland, 7 Psalms album, Paul Simon, and ships. Simon's first big hit was Sound of Silence from the album Wednesday Morning, 3 a.m. Wednesday is the 4th day of the week, and 3 a.m. is the beginning of the 4th watch, and so this hints at for 3 transgressions and for 4, meaning hints at Paul Simon. Which is why the timing of Simon's predicted fall connects with the defeat and death, if you will, of the Seattle Mariners, with their loss of 3-4 and losing the series 3-4. And all this hints at the ships in the 7 trumpets of God's judgment, and also connects with the last concert for the 7 Psalms tour in Seattle near the Space Needle and near where the Mariners play. Wow. And so that's it, guys. There you have it. What a prophecy this is. Praise God. Believe me, I know far better than you how the prediction made in this video was derived. And more importantly, I know far better than you why the righteous Christian God of the Bible has given me a voice through this prediction. If you are a quote-unquote Christian or Muslim, this prediction was not learned through a demon. Be warned that blaspheming the Holy Spirit is the unforgivable sin. If you are a New Ager or New Spirituality person, this prediction was not learned through somehow tapping into the supposed universal collective consciousness. If you are a conspiracy theorist, this prediction was not learned through figuring out a supposed code that the Illuminati and Satanists are using. This prediction was learned through the Bible and through watching carefully the Lord's prophetic signs, which Jesus commanded all Christians to do. Besides proving that Jesus Christ is the Lord, the reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction is to prove that the controversial things that I am saying in the videos on this channel are the truth. Therefore, a wise person will want to watch all of the videos on this channel. What I will also do is create a video or two that summarizes some of the controversial things that the Lord will prove to be true when the prediction being made in this video comes to pass. I will leave links to these must-watch videos in the description box below this video. Again, the purpose of this prediction, that is from God, is to prove these things that I will talk about. And therefore, it would be foolish to not watch the videos that I will leave links for in the description box below this video. Aliens and UFOs are demons masquerading as aliens and UFOs. Most people's spiritual experiences are demonic deception, especially if they are not a true follower of Christ. In the last days, many people who claim to be a follower of Christ will have spiritual experiences that are in reality demonic. God became a man and died a horrible death at the hand of the ruler of this world, Satan, and then defeated death for you, so that you too can overcome death, which is the price that must be paid for sin. It is time to repent, which means to change one's ways and turn to God and become a disciple of Jesus. Do not listen to or follow the example of most quote-unquote Christians. Instead, follow the teachings of Jesus, which most quote-unquote Christians ignore. Like Jesus, you must surrender your life. Put nothing ahead of Jesus, your Lord. Like Jesus, you must lay down your life so that you may live. As Jesus said, one must die first, like a kernel of wheat going into the ground, in order to then grow and produce fruit. And like Jesus said, one must produce fruit, or else like a branch or a tree not producing fruit, they will be thrown into the fire. Jesus was speaking to quote-unquote Christians when he said this. One must die the self in order to be born again. And like Jesus said, one must be born again to enter the kingdom. Like Jesus, you must sacrifice your life for the sake of the coming kingdom. It means to do work that involves some form of sacrifice and risk. To have faith does not mean to intellectually agree. You need to demonstrate your faith through taking action. To have faith means to trust in God's promises. Taking action demonstrates trust and fear of the Lord. The primary reason that the wrath of God is coming upon America is quote-unquote Christians that do not get what I have just explained. The only reason a Christian is alive is in order to help other people become Christians and make it to the kingdom. Do not be deceived by those on the political left claiming to be quote-unquote Christians. There is no such thing as a Christian on today's political progressive left. Jesus said, "Do not think I have come to abolish or change any bit of the law or the prophets of the Old Testament Bible." In other words, the God of the Old Testament Bible is the exact same God of the New Testament Bible. It is essential that you learn about the God of the Bible and his ways. The God of the Old Testament Bible is looking to see who will fear him, and to fear God is not the same thing as quote-unquote revering or honoring God. Through Christ's ransom payment, a Christian is someone who has been redeemed and freed from slavery to sin and Satan. In response, a true Christian recognizes that their life in this world does not belong to them, and they become a willing slave to Jesus for the sake of the kingdom. Please leave a like and upvote the video, and once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more, don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. And don't only put the link to this video or another video on this channel in comments sections of places you typically visit, but importantly, put the link to the video in places you never visit, where people who don't think like you visit. If you are a quote-unquote Christian, Nothing in terms of an evangelism tool compares to this video with its prediction. It is a massive bag of gold. Beware of Jesus' warning through the quote-unquote Christian that did nothing with his bag of gold and was banished to hell. Also, read Ezekiel chapter 3 and 33 for this same warning. If you think you might be spending too much time watching videos instead of working and sacrificing for the kingdom through handing out flyers and potentially helping hundreds of people in the same length of time as a video, my flyer is filled with amazing information that people need to know right now, and it points people to the video channel. Now is not the time to be handing out typical evangelical tracts that are largely based in error anyway, such as, quote, Jesus loves you, unquote, for example. You can hand out the flyer on busy street corners, put them on car windshields in busy parking lots, and put them in mailboxes. Just send the file to your local print shop. You can download the file from the website. Please leave a like and upvote the video, and once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more, don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. It is essential that everyone immediately read the homepage of my website, asteroidprediction.com. If you are watching this on the YouTube platform, please note that not all of the videos are on YouTube. You need to switch to the Odyssey.com or Rumble.com channel, and do it now in case you aren't able to later.